Where in the city can you go to take a woodland walk amongst great Glaswegians, Holocaust survivors, and Hollywood history? Find out now in this episode of Astonishing Glasgow. I am definitely on home turf for this episode, as I grew up on this street in Cathcart, literally a stone's throw from the wall of Cathcart Cemetery. On one occasion, a camper van's throw due to a failed handbrake, but the least said about that the better. I would have liked to have entered the cemetery here on Netherley Road, but these gates have been chained and padlocked for years. As a kid, I would just have climbed over, but I'm not that adventurous anymore. It's not the hurting myself that I fear, it's the having to come home and explain to Mrs. Astonishing exactly what I was doing when I did hurt myself. The gate into the Jewish section is also chained and padlocked, so I'm going to walk down Brenfield Road and go through the main gates at the end of Clarkston Avenue. The main entrance passes the front of the cemetery lodge, which was built in 1877 in the Scots baronial style. But by the 1980s, the house was being used by East Renfrewshire Council as a workman's bothy. The whole cemetery is under the control of East Renfrewshire Council, as it is technically just outside the city boundary. But under the postcode rule, it has a G postcode, so still qualifies for an episode of Astonishing Glasgow. By the turn of the century, that's the 21st century, the house was empty, derelict and unloved. Thankfully, the house was privately purchased and then restored. It's once again a family home, and it won a Glasgow Institute of Architects Design Award in 2011. Time to go inside the cemetery and introduce you to some of its residents. My route starts by turning left at the gate and going past the War Memorial. I remember this grave being cleaned in 2014, but she is filthy again. Alright, no need for the hand gestures, love. The first family memorial I'm looking for is the Simpsons. Not that Simpson family or this Simpson family. This Simpson is James Muir Simpson, who was a cabinet maker and upholsterer who owned a showroom on Sauchiehall Street. The Simpson I am looking for is Alexander Simpson, and his memorial is easy to find as it's right on the gushet of these two roads. Alexander Simpson was born in 1832 and was an engineer who specialised in railway tunnelling work. In the early 1880s, he worked for the Glasgow and City District Railway and oversaw the building of the tunnel between Finnieston and Belgrove Station. He built the Glasgow Harbour Tunnel and rotundas, parts of the West Highland Line, and then closer to home,
Stockhill Heath and Nettle Street, George's Cross and Govan Cross, where all the people meet. West Street, Shields Road, the train goes round and round. You've never lived unless you've been on the Glasgow Underground.
He was responsible for engineering the tunnels which carry the Glasgow subway. That's why I have just taken the inner and outer circle around his grave. Alexander Simpson took his last journey underground when he was buried here in 1922 after his death on May the 22nd. The right fork in the road continues uphill to get to the highest point in the cemetery. This is a cemetery, not a graveyard. If you don't know the difference, I'll share the details with you later in the video, but feel free to make your guesses now. As I climb the hill, I want to introduce you to some of the stars of the stage. Now, the first of these you may already be expecting, as she is possibly the most famous resident of Cathcart Cemetery. Margaret Jefferson might not be a name that is instantly familiar, but I would almost guarantee that you have heard of her son, the comic actor Stan Laurel. It seems a little unfair that all she's remembered for on her grave is who her son was. But Margaret Madge Jefferson was an actress and performer in her own right. She was the first wife of Arthur Jefferson and was 30 years old when her second son, Arthur Stanley Jefferson, was born in 1890. Margaret and Arthur Sr. had 5 children, but sadly she died suddenly in 1908 without ever getting to see Stan Laurel's first film, which was released in 1917. She was buried here in Cathcart Cemetery, and until 2020 her grave was unmarked until an unknown fan of Stan Laurel placed this makeshift headstone upon her grave. The second performer is a person I actually found out about in the ferry terminal in Oban while waiting to leave for Mull. I was with a tour group, so I didn't get a picture of the board, but I did see a large display telling the story of Jessie McLachlan, who is buried right here. Jessie was born in Oban in 1866. She achieved fame as one of the first to perform Gaelic songs on stage. Touring North America, New Zealand and across the UK, she was invited to sing for Queen Victoria. In 1899, Jessie made the first gramophone recording of a Gaelic song, whose name translates to English as Horo, my nut brown maiden. I am not even going to attempt the Gaelic version of the title. Jessie died on the 13th of May 1916, and as she was brought here 4 days later, a piper played MacCrimmon's Lament as her coffin was lowered into the grave. This must be Music Hall Row, as the next star of the stage is only around 3 plots away from Jessie's memorial, but it is hidden in amongst the trees. Mark Sheridan, comedian, is buried here, but contrary to what's written on his grave, his death in 1918 was far from a joke. Mark was born in 1864 as Frederick Shaw, but changed his name when he took to the stage. He performed in plays and pantomimes and recorded more than 50 songs, but his most famous recording was I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside. This is the voice of Mark you can hear right now, recorded in 1910.
Oh, I do like to be beside the seaside. I do like to be beside the sea. I do like the sound.
In 1917, Mark Sheridan returned to Glasgow with a show called Gay Paris, which he wrote and financed himself at the cost of £2,000. There were 40 actors in the show, including 2 of his sons, but the show received negative reviews from press and audiences. Mark Sheridan was devastated after reading the critics' words in the morning papers, and on the 15th of January 1918, he walked to Kelvingrove Park and used his own gun to end his life with a single shot to the head. He was buried here 3 days later. Onwards and upwards, and I'm nearing the highest point of the cemetery. I wish I had time to tell you so many more of the stories of the people buried here, but that would be a video longer than Ben-Hur. So far I have been wandering around the cemetery for about 2 hours, reading the different names and their stories on the gravestones. It reminds me of hours spent standing in the newsagent and reading all the best bits of the magazines and buying none of them. Now that has to be my most contrived link yet, because on the highest point of the hill is this gravestone, first placed for Donald McCall in 1930. He was the superintendent of cleansing for Glasgow Corporation, but his sons are also buried here, and they were the founders of R.S. McCall, the newsagent chain. As well as being a co-founder of the news agency, Robert Smith McCall was a professional footballer who played for Queen's Park, Newcastle United, Glasgow Rangers and the Scottish national team. On the same row as Robert McCall's grave, not that Robert McCall, and I'll be astonished if anyone gets the reference, but on the same row is a gravestone that growing up me and all my friends would refer to as Stonehenge. It's not so obvious now, but this grave originally had a capstone, making it look just like part of the prehistoric monument. Erected for Archibald Robertson, a ship owner and quarrymaster, the top stone was toppled by somebody in a stolen forklift truck in 1995, in an act of mindless vandalism. The stone has never been replaced back on top of the grave. It's about 2 tons of granite and it needs to be lifted about 7 foot in the air. So it still lies where it fell, behind the grave. I would take you in for a closer look, but there's no chance. It is fully overgrown with brambles and thorns, so I can't get any closer. There's a great view north to the city centre from the top of the hill, and looking south you can see Whiteley's wind farm on Fenwick Moor. There are also some pretty dark clouds heading this way, so before the rain gets here, I'm going to get off the top of the hill to explore the jungle in search of an Egyptian temple and another Hollywood connection. While I walk through the overgrown paths and the piles of golden leaves, a little bit of history on the cemetery. And did you know the reason why it is a cemetery, not a graveyard? A graveyard is built around a church. There's no church here, so this is a cemetery. The cemetery was opened in 1878 and was designed by William Ross McKelvey, a leading architect of burial grounds. Victorians didn't hide from death. If you could afford an extravagant tomb or memorial, you wanted it erected in a carefully laid out cemetery. A place where you would be surrounded by woodland and flowers as you promenaded down the avenues and reflected on your loved one's life. There's around 15,000 graves spread over 43 acres of Cathcart Cemetery. Burials in the old part of the cemetery only really take place when people are being added to family plots. It is, however, still pretty common to see new burials in the new side of Cathcart Cemetery, especially in the Muslim section and the Jewish section. Up to now we have met engineers, actors and businessmen, but you will also find graves of artists, suffragettes, war heroes and politicians. If you'd like to read more about the people who are buried here, you can log on to the Friends of Cathcart Cemetery webpage. Fantastic resource. I'll put links in the description of the video below. A lot of the cemetery is now overgrown, but I think that adds to the peaceful nature of the space, and on a sunny autumn afternoon it is a great place for a bimble. Wandering down the hill, I love this part of the cemetery because I get to feel like Howard Carter or Indiana Jones as I push through the trees and weeds and I'm met with an Egyptian temple. The mausoleum of William and Mary Hood is the most spectacular grave in Cathcart Cemetery. The whole space looked very different when it was constructed in 1900. There was no ivy and no trees, not even the tallest monkey puzzle tree I think I've ever seen. William Hood wasn't an actor, politician or footballer. He was a successful butcher and justice of the peace. When William died in 1899, aged 57, his wife Mary commissioned the tomb to reflect his love of travelling through Europe, Africa and of course Egypt. The tomb was constructed by the sculptors Scott and Ray and cost £1,311 and 11 shillings in 1900. That's the equivalent of just over £140,000 in today's money. It was designed as a replica of Trajan's kiosk, an unfinished temple near Aswan in Egypt. Mary Hood also donated £500, that's around £50,000 now, to the Trades House in 1915 to form the William Hood Memorial Fund. A condition of the gift was that the Trades House would maintain the memorial for all time. Mary died in 1918, also aged 57, and was buried in the tomb with William. It's now very overgrown and sadly it's been damaged in places. I do not understand the mentality of somebody who wants to vandalise something that looks this good. The worst damage is to the granite gravetop, which has been smashed into multiple pieces and the griffin has lost its head. Growing up, I remember when this was all intact. What you may not realise is that you could have already seen this temple, even if you have never been to Cathcart Cemetery, as it became a star of the silver screen. Well, briefly. In the 2010 film Neds, the lead character John brings his date through Cathcart Cemetery, and they have a wee smooch inside the mausoleum. A few years ago, before I started the Astonishing Glasgow project, I worked on another project which I called Rewound and Found. I went in search of all the filming locations for Ned's, Taggart, Gregory's Girl, That Sinking Feeling. So if you want to see more of the film locations from Ned's, go and have a look at rewoundandfound.com. But for now, this isn't the only scene from Ned's that was filmed in Cathcart Cemetery. A more pivotal scene was filmed just further down the path on the main stretch. It's on this stretch that John confronts his school bully, and, without spoiling too much, the bully gets his dome caved in. All about 100 metres from the house I grew up in. It's starting to get dark, and the last story I really want to tell you is that of Marianne and Jack Grant. But they're buried in the Jewish section, on the other side of Netherley Road. As we already know, both gates are locked, and I'm on the wrong side of this one. I'm still not climbing over, so I need to go up the hill and go all the way round. Saying that, it would probably be easier climbing over the fence than it would be walking up over the hill and round the long way. Well, that's a slightly worrying omen by this point of the day. But by following the perimeter wall around, I come to a small gate. I'm really glad of this wee gate. It means I don't have to go all the way to the exit. Once I'm in the new section of Cathcart Cemetery, I'm still not quite at the Jewish section where Marianne is buried. I need to make my way through the mausoleum section, which is still a very active part of this cemetery. This part of the graveyard has really changed in the last 30 years. I used to come up here and play football long before anyone was actually buried here, so it all looks very different to how I remember it. Now, before I get to Marianne's grave in the Jewish section, I thought I would share a bit of exactly why she's important enough to be featured in an episode of Astonishing Glasgow. Marianne was born in Prague in 1921. When Germany invaded Czechoslovakia in 1939, Marianne, being Jewish, was deported to the Theresienstadt ghetto in 1942. 18 months later, she was moved to the Auschwitz concentration camp. She was forced to work in the children's block at Auschwitz, but was able to use her talents as an artist to brighten up the children's surroundings. Her work was noticed by Joseph Mengele, who forced Marianne to paint family trees of the twins and dwarfs they experimented on for his records. She was in Auschwitz for 7 months before being sent to a forced labour camp, and then Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where she was rescued at its liberation in 1945. She had lost 22 family members during the war, but she was a survivor. She was taken to Sweden to recover, and while there she began writing to Jack Grant, a refugee who had settled in Glasgow during the war after escaping on a kinder transport train. When they finally met in person, love blossomed, and the married couple settled in Glasgow. She completed her education at the Glasgow School of Art, and Jack became the rabbi of a synagogue in Newton Mearns. In 2002, after being locked in a trunk for 50 years, she allowed the paintings of her first-hand experiences in the concentration camps to be displayed to the public in a permanent exhibition at Kelvingrove Art Gallery.
You shouldn't be prejudiced against other religions, other creeds, other colours. We're all people, we're all the same people. We're all God's creations, and we shouldn't hate. Hatred is a terrible thing.
When she passed away in 2007, her paintings were gifted to the city of Glasgow, and there is still a gallery at Kelvingrove dedicated to Marianne Grant's story and her art. Due to their fragile nature and the powerful subject matter, there are only a few of her paintings on display at any one time. Though it is an incredibly important gallery to go and visit, to remember that Astonishing Glaswegians didn't always start their lives in Astonishing Glasgow. Now it's getting dark, wet and cold, so time to head home. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode of Astonishing Glasgow. If you have, please hit those like and subscribe buttons if you didn't already. If you want to help me tell more stories of our great city, you can purchase t-shirts, hoodies, stickers and more from the Spreadshirt page, the links below. You can donate directly through the Super Thanks button, and these are the superstars who did just that after the last episode. Thank you all very much. If you want to get in touch, leave a comment below or head over to the social media pages. All the links are in the video description. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time in Astonishing Glasgow. What is that? Is that a Bigfoot?
Looks like a big tube to me.
Charming. See you later.